Hello and welcome to our presentation today, an exploratory investigation of the effectiveness of the True Sport Clean anti-doping program among youth sport athletes. My name is Dr. Mike Van Bussel, and I'm joined today by Dr. Kirsty Spence. We are members in the Department of Sport Management at Brock University, and we'd also like to recognize Matt Milligan and Zaya Domain as they are our individuals that have represented our RAs for this particular project and are key individuals in the development of our presentation and papers. Thank you to Matt and Zaya. Today's agenda, what we are going to take a look at is the genesis of the True Sport Clean program, previous research tied back to values-based education and online learning, also our purposes and objectives of the study, the research contributions that it will make, our research design and methodologies, the findings and emergent themes that will apply, and really the next steps and conclusions to our research today. The True Sport Clean program is a comprehensive e-learning program offered to national sport organizations and youth sport athletes. It addresses the ethical issues in sport with regards to substance abuse and methods of illicit performance and enhancements, looking at sample collection, procedures, and many different items that apply. It is really one of the only programs that the individuals in youth sport athletics will face. And these individuals may not have had experience to this information prior to this learning module. So it's an important part of the education program offered by the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport and our national sport organizations. Looking at previous research, Hallward and Duncan looked at the examination of anti-doping programs and stated that the efficacy and effectiveness and their evaluation therein has been relatively scarce in the literature. Thus, we saw a need to examine this significant educational program within our youth sport athletics. Masucci et al. Also tied in some factors with regards to shame and guilt were major factors in refraining from prohibited doping, whereas perceived health and wellness consequences of doping was seen to be the weakest form of anti-doping education. The True Sport Clean program is based on values-based education, and we want to see its effectiveness and strength therein of utilizing this particular format. Analyzing the impact of value-based education programming in sport and physical education environments has been done at a preliminary level. However, it has never been done with regards to anti-doping programming. Thus, we saw a significant need to bring this research forward. Looking at value-based versus fear-based anti-doping programs, Backhouse and colleagues looked at the negative campaigns focused on doping controls, the prohibitive list and sanctions towards positivity and engagement, looking at a shift from the negative elements to the positive as an important part, an important change therein. Hence why the CCES has really gravitated towards this particular approach and the creation of the True Sport Clean program. The link of the impact of value-based education program to athletes' motivation to complete clean is absolutely completely absent from the literature. Thus, we said it was an important part to try to create this link in saying, can we have an impact on values and in bringing this forward? And does this program do as such? In terms of the purpose of our particular study, we wanted to examine and explore youth sport student athletes and their engagement in the True Sport Clean program offered by the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport. It was the anti-doping online education program, which addresses student health implications, doping in sport, and its impact on motivations and behaviors. Within this, we put a conscious effort to place athletes' voice at the center of this empirically based program evaluation. We did not evaluate any administrators in terms of the program itself or coaches that were involved. We wanted to get the individuals that are engaging with the program in order to say, how was the interface? Was it effective? And the multiple changes that we need to possibly make throughout. In terms of the objectives for the study, was to measure the effectiveness of the True Sport Clean online education program for youth sport athletes. And our second objective was to analyze the impact of value-based education versus fear-based education for anti-doping youth sport athletes. In Canada, as mentioned, intercollegiate sport, True Sport Clean is the only anti-doping education program for youth sport athletes within. So it's an important element to consider, as it may be the only touch point for this, where they may or may not see doping protocols being brought to their particular team or themselves as individuals. So it's an important touch point for us to evaluate. In terms of the research contributions, we broke this down into three particular areas. First off, the theoretical elements there really address the existing theoretical gaps on the impact of value-based education and the effectiveness of those anti-doping programs. From an educational perspective, we saw that athletes' perceptions of the degree of effectiveness contributes to their learning and motivations to complete clean. And finally, there was an analysis of value-based anti-doping programs and the parameters for enhancement of youth sport athletes and Canadian high-performance athletes. We see this as an important way in which to improve this particular program. I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Kirsty Spence.
Thanks, Dr. Van Bussel. Hi, everyone. I'm here to talk a little bit about research design, and then we'll get into some of the findings. So in this project, we chose to utilize an epistemological paradigm of constructivism so that each athlete, student athlete, could construct meaning from their own individual place of meaning making. In order to utilize such a paradigm, we felt that a qualitative research design was a best fit to align with this paradigm. And moreover, folks like Hallward and Duncan and Mizuki et al. Have utilized such a research design within the realm of doping and anti-doping domains. So we felt that this research design was a best complement for the existing literature, as well as to extend the literature per the theoretical gaps that we've already that Dr. Van Bussel already spoke to. So next slide. In terms of actually looking at our research methodologies, given the focus of the COVID-19, this research was timely, given the focus of online learning has increased significantly during this time. Aligned with the qualitative research design, we sought to incorporate triangulation. And triangulation was achieved through our data collection methodologies, including multi-site focus group interviews, as well as individually based semi-structured interviews with each of the student athletes that we recruited. And a third aspect of triangulation here was participants' written feedback regarding the program originally gathered by the CCES. Thanks, next slide. So in terms of the data collection and analysis, we had to pivot a bit given COVID-19. Originally, we were going to be in person to collect data at multi-sites across Canada. And in terms of making that pivot, we moved to online data collection and to be later analyzed. So in terms of actually collecting virtual data, we recruited student athlete participants among 5 youth sport institutions, all of which were located in Ontario. And in terms of actually the data collection, we actually, Dr. Van Bussel reached out to many different institutions, of which 5 agreed to participate. And within that sample of 5 institutions, there were various different ways that we connected with the student athletes, whether it was us connecting with student athletes directly, or whether it was through an institutional gatekeeper to recruit such participants. But in the end, we conducted 5 focus group athletes with those who agreed to meet with us, that were then followed by individual interviews with each of the student athletes from each of the 5 different institutions. And in total, we had 22 individual student athletes participate within their respective focus group interview per the institution, as well as within their own respective individual semi-structured interview. So there were 13 female participants and there were 9 male participants, which was interesting given that the proportion of male athletes to female athletes is greater male U Sport athletes to female U Sport athletes. As far as data analysis is concerned, actually, if you go back to the previous slide, we analyzed the qualitative data that we received using inductive analysis to construct themes from the interview data and the evaluation data from CCES, as was guided by our purpose. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the emergent themes, of which there are 4. I'll speak to the first 2, and Dr. Van Bussel can speak to themes 3 and 4. So the first was access to and nature of online programming, according to student athletes. The second are their thoughts and perceptions around innovating delivery of the True Sport Clean program. The third is the emphasis on fear-based learning. And theme 4 is the program linked to avoiding unintentional doping. So as mentioned, speak to the first 2 themes, the first of which is the notion of access to and nature of online programming. So our participants felt that the access to the True Sport Clean online programming was challenging at first, but then easy to navigate. So in terms of actually being challenging to access, one quote that stood out to us was, almost all of our girls had trouble getting into their account. When they finally got past their password, they couldn't open the actual testing portion. Furthermore, once they did get going, they found that, quote, it was quite simple to navigate. The arrows and the modules were clearly laid out, so it flowed pretty nicely. So furthermore, in terms of access to and nature of online programming, another subtheme was most participants felt that the program is repetitive and lengthy. So in terms of actually what that meant to student athletes, one person said, quote, it's very, very, very wordy. A lot of information is being all thrown at you at once versus maybe adding a few pictures, maybe adding some animations, something like that, end quote. Another individual mentioned, quote, it has plenty of information. I'm not doing this for learning or understanding the protocols. I'm doing this because I have to compete, end quote. So these 3 sub-themes were all harnessed around the actual online, the context of the online programming and both accessing it and the nature of. In terms of the second theme that we found was innovating the delivery of the True Sport Clean program. And so these were some suggestions, which included a theme of people saying that an in-person presentation would be very helpful, where student athletes could engage in conversations and ask questions about doping with an expert. To that end, one person mentioned, I think the live in-person is effective just because hearing someone speak and seeing visuals and listening to someone, you can retain better information rather than just sitting in front of a screen going through the modules. Another person said, quote, I think online is great, but I think in-person would be just as great. Excuse me. A little bit of both. I think the online training is super important before the season starts and everything. but just touching base again, maybe in the winter when we have off season, end quote. To continue with this theme, another suggestion was that a larger module could be split so student athletes could complete both a smaller module, each in both the fall and the spring, to increase engagement and retention of information. So to this end, thoughts were, quote, we should have training throughout the year, even after season, off season. I feel like the more we hear it, the more we know, rather than rushing training right before we have to start our season, as is the case with some compliance in terms of fulfilling the mandate of completing the program by a certain date. And lastly, with respect to this theme, another suggestion was that the module could be brought to sport-specific doping training. That is, specific to endurance sports, or specific to contact sports, or specific to team sports. And in that end, one person said, quote, I think it could be different for each sport. That's something that needs to be considered as well. That the parameters, end quote, that the parameters of the sport dictated the program delivery. Thanks for listening, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Van Bussel.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Spence. I think that continuing on, the emphasis on fear-based versus value-based education, even though the elements of the program were developed as a value-based program, there were still fear-based components that rang true for these athletes. So emphasizing the consequences using fear-based teaching and learning strategies was more effective than instilling values with regards to anti-doping education. So one of the quotes here, I definitely remember more about the fear-based content just because it puts it in perspective. The consequences of your actions and what it could mean if you decide to take these doping steps. So emphasis here about the fear of letting an individual down or letting your team down were relatively prevalent here. The last element that was interesting as well was the link to avoiding unintentional doping. It was quite effective. Yeah, I would definitely not take cold medication before the game now that I've gone through that particular program. This was a constant theme that was found throughout, and we were really highlighting this. In line with this as well was the link to the Global DRO website app that was available as a tool to help students avoid unintentional doping. This was an app that they can contain on their phone, and they would be able to access in the store or in the supplement store, where they'd be able to pull up quickly on their phone and check if it was really effective and legal to consume. The final finding, which was very interesting, was the abuse of the True Sport Clean program. The quote here was the abuse of the process and vets actually making rookies do their program for them. There are vets that used to make the rookies do theirs for them. It wasn't good. They were able to do that because it wasn't monitored. So they would sit down with two laptops open beside me doing their program and mine at the same time. As an older vet called it, it was our rite of passage. So in terms of observation and how the program is put together, this was also significant and important. I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Spence.
Thank you. So in terms of some next steps and conclusions, one of the aspects that we found to be most heartening in terms of the effectiveness of the True Sport Clean program was that the program was found through student athletes' perceptions that it supports their avoidance of unintentional doping, as Dr. Van Bussel just mentioned. Moreover, the program helps to educate them about anti-doping, and it also promotes discussion around the topic, whether that discussion is centered within the team, among teammates, or within the team context between their leadership group as well. That said, further work obviously needs to be conducted from our findings. And in terms of our emergent findings and some of the themes, really points to this further exploration around the delivery change and implementation of the True Sport Clean program. So in this presentation, we alluded to some of the suggestions that student athletes, that emerged among student athletes. And we need to juxtapose those findings in against the consideration of the massive scope of Canada, in which the True Sport Clean program is delivered among thousands of youth sport athletes, as well as the cost of such changes and implementation of such changes. So, is redelivery possible in light of those kinds of factors? Moreover, further work could be conducted with deeper study of values versus fear-based learning, particularly to how learning impacts these program changes. So in terms of who is the audience and what is being delivered, what is that alignment and how effective is that alignment? As well as exploring the link between student athletes learning with their preferences, student athletes learning preferences with their motives to participate cleanly. We think that there's much work that can be done in that realm as well. One of the really interesting and I guess at the beginning of the study that was emerging was, this link to leadership and the leadership team within the context of sport teams. So we feel that further research linking to leadership is both valid and necessary in terms of the coach and the management team, their philosophy and their processes in how they continue the conversation around anti-doping. So what is the relationship to student athletes' uptake and their learning about anti-doping in the context of the team and vis-a-vis the leadership of the team, as well as leaders' assistance in normalizing the topic? We found that student athletes really would love to remove the stigma of anti-doping and just have the topic ongoing as part of a normal discussion within their team setting. So we'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for being with us, and we look forward to discussing our presentation with you furthermore when we meet. Thanks again very much.
Thank you.